Hello, I'm Pastor Tim Holscher, and I was off yesterday. Um, we got up in the middle of the night and came to the west side of the state, and our daughter gave birth to our second grandchild, a little boy. And so we made a drive over in the middle of the night and are here taking care of our 3-year-old granddaughter while they're at the hospital. And their stay at the hospital is going to be a little while. Um, Everybody is doing okay now, but my daughter had been sick going into this, and there were some complications. And for those of you that don't know me, I tend very easily to being a worrywart. And as a worrywart, I struggled quite a bit during that evening or that night coming back here, and then the next day, just knowing some of the things that were taking place. But God had all that in hand. In fact, God always has all things in hand. And I had trouble falling asleep, so I wanted to share something with you. I'm not saying I'm always good at this when I'm worried about things, but we know that we're supposed to take things to God in prayer. But I was praying to God, and I kept thinking, I just keep asking you to take care in this situation, and yet this is something it's not like you're up there waiting for me to ask. You are going to do what you're going to do. And so in that, I was thinking, I should worship, because this is oftentimes what I encourage other people to do, is to worship and think about God. And as I was doing that, I just started thinking about God's character. And after a few minutes of doing that, I just went back through the Old Testament. And this is one of those things where the Old Testament is full of great accounts in which we get to see God act, in which we get to see God step up and really demonstrate his character. He's always doing these kinds of things. It's just that sometimes they are more discernible for us. Started back in Genesis with creation. With dealing with the flood, dealing with Abraham and the things he did, thinking of God bringing Israel out of Egypt and through the Red Sea and protecting them as they wandered for 40 years, despite the fact that they had been in rebellion, taking them into the land and giving the people of the land into their hand. The fall of Jericho being a good example of that, of how God delivered Goliath into David's hand, and just on and on through these examples. And the reason that's important to rehearse those is because it's good for us to go back and say, what has God done? What do I know God has done? Now, the thing is, if you've also lived the Christian life for any length of time, you've seen God do things in your life. I've watched God do things in my life. And when that happens, then as a believer, you're able to say, and you did this, and you did this. In other words, you're seeing God write your story. Here in Daniel chapter 3, we have an account in which Nebuchadnezzar, the arrogant king of Babylon, has made a 90-foot image. Some people, myself included, think the image may be of himself, or the image that he had in the dream from Daniel 2. One way or another, he makes this large image, and he wants everybody in his kingdom to come and fall down before this, all the people that have any attachment to his government. And among those 3 people, now we don't know why Daniel wasn't present here. There's all kinds of speculation. But we have Daniel's 3 friends. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which you see there in verse 16. We know him as Mishael, Hananiah, and Azariah, Hananiah, Mishael. Those are their Hebrew names, or Israeli names. And they didn't bow down. And Nebuchadnezzar comes and he's enraged and he tells them to bow down. He's going to give them a second chance because remember, if they don't bow down, they're going to be thrown into the furnace of fire. And it says here in verse 16, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, now they're taking this from Nebuchadnezzar's point of view. They're not questioning whether he exists. They're just saying, you, Nebuchadnezzar, may question whether he exists. So if the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire. And he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. That was a pretty, saying rescue us from the fire is one thing. Saying that he could rescue them from his power of this arrogant king. That was really stepping over the line. But then verse 18, but even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. We're not going to do it. They had confidence in their God. They had seen what their God had done when they first came to Babylon. They had seen how God turned their kingdom over to Nebuchadnezzar per the prophecies of Jeremiah, and perhaps even they were recognized some of the prophecies of some of the others, such as Isaiah and Hosea and such. And so they may have recognized some of these other prophecies in which God was talking about his judgment through other nations, and now that had come to pass. One way or another, they're confident our God can deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down. I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, our God can take care of us, so we're not afraid of you because our God's going to rescue us. That's a good thing to be able to say, but to be able to say, even if our God chooses not to rescue us, we're still not going to bow down? Is that the way we live our Christian life? Or do we live our Christian life and our relationship to our problems by saying, God, I will worship you if you do the things that I think you ought to do. But you know what? If you don't, if I'm not sure that you're going to do this for me, I might not. I mean, that's the way the world would operate with their gods. They're going to say, hey, God, if you do this for me, or a God, or whatever it is, then I will obey you. But what about obeying God and doing what God wants, even if that's not what God wants for us to do? Even if that's not, or excuse me, even bowing down, even if God doesn't, pardon me, even if God doesn't step up. And it's not that he can't, it's not that he so much wouldn't, it's just that maybe he has another purpose, which is sometimes hard for us to appreciate. Therefore, I think being able to go back and review some of these things, it's good exercise for us. To be those who pick up our Bibles and read our Bibles and are familiar with these accounts. Some of these accounts are very short. We're familiar with the big accounts, David and Goliath, and Daniel in the lion's den, things like that. But sometimes the accounts are very small. They're just short, very short vignettes of things that God has done, references to things that God has done. And I think it's important for us to be familiar with those, to remember those once in a while, to pick up our Bible and read these things and be reminded this is our God and this is what he does. And be assured when we find ourselves in a time that might challenge us, that we can rely on him. And it's one of those things that as we do that, it encourages us to have a good day in the Lord. Thank you so much for joining me.